bodies become more fluid. There's this interactive quality. Sometimes I'm not even physically touching the body. My hands are above the body, but I could feel the internal organs moving as I move my hands above the body.
Hey everyone, at the Podcast Connection Network, we bring you incredible independent voices.
But as passionate creators, we rely on your support to thrive.
Subscribe and listen. Regular listens tell platforms our shows matter.
Rate and review. Your feedback helps others find us and shows advertisers our value.
Share the love. Tell your friends and online communities about your favorite shows. These simple actions make a huge difference.
You're supporting independent creators and keeping their voices alive. Welcome back, amazing souls, to Connection Over Perfection. In today's episode, I'm joined by Ben Oofana, a healer whose life's work is a testament to the transformative power of embracing our true potential. During our planning call, we found ourselves immersed in conversation that made it a bit challenging to narrow down a topic for this episode, but I think we've done it. Ben's story is one of deep connection to the healing traditions of the Kiowa tribe and the Taoist arts, a blend that he has harnessed to help people navigate through life setbacks and find their inner strength. He's not only a guide to many, but also embodiment of the resilience and growth that comes from overcoming adversity. As we chatted, I was struck by Ben's humility and wisdom and his dedication to fostering genuine connections, something that we both deeply resonate with. His experiences from the powerful mentorships of whom I will let him tell you about so I don't completely butcher their names, to his own personal transformations are a true inspiration. So let's dive into this conversation about healing, growth, and the beautiful complexities of the human experience. Ben, welcome to the show, and it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. I very much appreciate being on with you today. And just to touch on that quickly, from the age of early childhood, I was just drawn to Native Americans and other indigenous peoples. And by the time I was 17, I had taken off on my own, saved up, bought a car, still in high school, but made it as far as Oklahoma. Started going into the peyote meetings, sitting up in the teepee all night with Native elders. And at 20, I began to apprentice with Horace Dokai, one of the last surviving traditional doctors, medicine men among the Kiowa tribe. Horace transmitted portions of his own healing gifts, and in order to earn the right to work with these gifts of healing, one goes through the vision quest, which is typically involves going out to fast 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. And years later, I went on to train with Shifu Li Tai Liang in the internal martial arts of Xing Yi Quan and Baguazhang, which are rooted in the Taoist traditions. And all this training has played a major part in my own healing and growth transformation, but it's a big part of the work that I do with people individually. So,
Ben, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And that leads me to my first question is I would love to hear more about your personal journey. And can you give us just a glimpse into kind of what led you to embrace all these traditional healing practices and kind of where you are now?
a lot of it was just because even in my adolescence, looking around, seeing people, the lives they were living, getting up in the morning, going to school, going to work, coming home, watching TV. In much of rural America, what else is there to do other than watch TV in the evenings? But even in larger cities, is now whether you go out to the theater or to watch a movie or just even a lot of the normal sorts of things that people engage with, it just felt kind of boring to me. It just didn't feel like that much of a life. And somehow I was always drawn to the paranormal. And so when I started hearing about these traditional native doctors among the various tribes and how they would have these profound visionary experiences through the vision quest and other indigenous ritual practices that they'd engage in, and healing that they were able to facilitate within the bodies and minds of others, I was just so fascinated and thinking, wow, if I've ever given the opportunity, this was what I'll do with my life. I spent about 3 years with my mentor, Horace. And during that time, as I said, he would transmit portions of his own healing gifts. He'd have me fasting without the food and water, the vision quest, and it was so intense, the time that I spent with him. But after a few years, I put myself back in college, completed a degree, put my head back together. As I began to work with people on my own, it was like pouring hydrogen peroxide into an infected wound. And much of the traumas of my childhood and adolescence began to reemerge during that time. And much of it was in relation to my attempts to form intimate relationships as I began to develop attachments. So I often found myself developing attachments to women who were unavailable or disinterested, or in some instances, few of them were quite abusive. And it was just triggering this profound vulnerability. And I had absolutely no idea what to do with it in the beginning. Started working with a psychotherapist, but even that, I was gaining an intellectual understanding, and yet it wasn't healing the actual trauma. And so somehow instinctively, I had this sense that I needed to dive into the depth of that pain. I was breathing softly and deeply, and sometimes I would do so for hours. But at a certain point, I could feel that pain breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. And as that happened, there would be these emanations of warmth beginning to glow from within. I had the opportunity to work with some gifted healers, one from Brazil, another from the Philippines. And I could feel that beginning the process of dismantling or deconstructing those deeply traumatic wounds that were embedded within my body and mind. But the fact that they didn't come around very often, and yet I needed so much more intervention at the time. But around the time I turned 30, I was feeling that pull to return to the Wichita Mountains to go on the vision quest. It was during the vision quest, times I'd be on the mountain. In many instances, it was like a near-death experience. It's like portions of my life would be flashing before my eyes, and I'd be reliving some of these traumatic events in my childhood and my adolescence. And I could feel this profound presence descending into my body. And it was not only deconstructing those old traumatic wounds, but also building this whole new foundation that didn't exist before. Come out the other side much lighter, freer. I could see that I had a lot more resources that weren't available before. And just the quality of my relationships was improving. And this has been an ongoing process. I've been making my way back to the Wichita Mountains like twice a year for over 30 years now. And in between going to the mountain, I just do all this intensive practice every day. And when you train from a master from China, traditional Native American doctor, all these ancient traditions, you see these individuals and they do hours of intensive daily practice. And as they do so, they develop this stronger and stronger foundation. They continue to build greater and greater internal power. And in doing so, they realize, there's a term in some of the Hindu Vedic traditions, self-realization. So the more you do this practice, the daily practice and these interventions, like going through the vision quest, you're continually building that foundation, developing greater capabilities and resources that you didn't have access to before.
Oh, that's huge. Thank you so much for sharing. And so I just want to go back and make sure that I'm getting your story right. I think I hear you saying that really your journey started because you were tired of the mundane and you're like, there has to be something different than this. And that really started you on this journey. And then you really became connected to yourself, but we're still craving that connection to others, which led you on a deeper journey to learn more and dig deeper. And that's really where those traumas were coming up. And then you were able to work through and process those where they hadn't been before. And so you continue to keep those practices and continue to build that foundation. Is that close?
Yeah, many of us who have experienced these various traumas, actually, I think all of us, there's varying degrees of incapacitation as a result of the traumatic wounds that we carry, or even a lot of the chronic stress that we endure, the crazy ass dysfunction that many of us grow up with. We
Right.
internalize the relational dynamic. This is not about parent blaming, because I feel for the most part, our parents are doing the best they can with the resources and understanding they possess. But we have all kinds of things. There's dysfunctional dynamics that often exist. I mean, it's on
Right.
a continuum, from very low to very high
Right. Well,
function.
that duality that both can exist. Our parents could have done the best that they could with what they had, but it still wasn't enough and it still caused trauma for us. Both can be true. Yes.
Yes, and everybody is human. We all have our vulnerabilities, our faults in ways. And then as we venture forward into the world, I mean, even just in school, there's bullying. There's, we might have teachers that dislike us, and we're the last to be chosen, or one of the last to be chosen when it comes to like, want to be on this team or that team. And so all these things impact us. And then as we grow into adolescence and in adulthood, all kinds of things, like we start forming romantic attachments. And maybe if we're not the most handsome or the most beautiful, then we don't get as much attention or attract as much interest. And so we don't receive that validation. And
Right.
yeah, there are just so many things that impact us. And the fact that most of us, we were never taught how to work constructively with our emotions. And so the
That's
fact that we
huge.
don't know how to do so, when we have these experiences of one form or another, we suffer sometimes these abuses or endure whatever dysfunction or craziness or stress. And we internalize these experiences if we're going through whatever it is, whether it's from childhood through our adolescence and our adulthood and our work, our professional lives, or adult romantic, intimate, or attempts at intimate relationships. When these experiences are evoking a lot of difficult, unpleasant, or stressful emotions, and if we don't know how to work with those emotions, the tendency is we distract ourselves, we try to escape from the feelings, we numb ourselves to them, we try to cover it over with positive affirmations, or
Right.
that's like pouring cologne on top of body
Yes.
odor. It's like
Right.
the stench is still there. It's just we just masked
Right.
it a bit. But in so many people, self-medicating with alcohol or even foods, refined sugars, other recreational drugs, in addition to alcohol, and where we smoke cigarettes or whatever, it's anything just not to feel. But in doing so, if we don't learn to work with our emotions and we're going through these stressful or even traumatic events in some instances, and it elicits a very powerful emotional response. And if we're not able to process these emotions, they never just go away. It's like the stress, the emotion remains trapped in our bodies. And the chronic stress of working at a job we dislike or that we even hate, coworkers that we are not too fond of, maybe even despise them or something, or employer, or just being in relationships that are dysfunctional, toxic, or someone is very hurtful and abusive. And if we can't process the emotions, then it's harder for us to gain the crucial insights and to come to that internal resolution that enables us to gain the insights, the understanding, to come to that resolution that enables us to let go and move on, to keep moving forward.
That brings me to something that you talked about a little bit earlier, and also something that we talked about in our planning call, was the importance of breathing through the pain and how
Mhm.
this practice has really helped you. And can you just talk a little bit more about that and how someone might use that, what that looks like?
Sure. I'll give an example from my own experience. Because I suffered the trauma in my childhood and adolescence and formed these attachments to women that were themselves deeply wounded. On one hand, I wanted some of those relationships to work. And even that desperate trying is an attempt to avoid the pain, not wanting to experience the loss, the feelings of abandonment. But by resisting the feelings, and there are all kinds of ways that we do this. One thing that I would do myself, which I find many people do. We go up into our head and we overanalyze. We continually hash out all the details, anyone we can get to listen to us. But it's also becomes a way in which we're avoiding the pain of our situation, avoiding the pain of what is not working in a relationship or whatever area of our life. And it took me quite a long time to realize that I needed to fully acknowledge the reality of what was occurring. The fact that the relationship wasn't working. Maybe she was interested in someone else or was in some way jerking me around emotionally. But the more that I could be present to the actual reality of what was occurring, acknowledge what was happening, and feel my authentic emotional responses. And it wasn't enough to just feel it like, okay, I'm feeling it now. I actually had to sit, close my eyes, drop deep into those feelings, notice where the feelings were residing within my body, go into the middle of those feelings, be as present as I could, and breathe very softly, deeply, whatever time it takes. Sometimes, if maybe you connect with somebody, or at least it seems like you're connecting, maybe not, but it feels like you are, and that person ghosts you or sends you a text and flakes out, oh, I can't make it today. If the attachment isn't that strong, maybe in 10 or 15 minutes, you drop into those feelings, you breathe with them. Maybe in that little of a time, you may process through or digest those feelings. But if you're deeply attached to someone, or if some kind of ongoing situation that's caused you a great deal of distress, and if there is a history of trauma on your part, the wounds are often considerably deeper. And not only are you feeling what's going on in the present moment, but it's attached to all these deeply wounding experiences, often a whole succession of these events or experiences you've gone through. So it could take considerably more time. You may need to continue. Maybe you breathe with these feelings for 30 minutes or an hour or multiple hours through the day. And a lot of these feelings will continue to resurface in the coming hours and days and weeks, but months.
Hey there, beautiful souls. I'm Amber McCrae, your therapeutic nutritionist and emotionally focused therapy coach, dedicated to guiding you on your holistic wellness journey. If you're ready to reclaim your health, nourish your body, and cultivate deeper connections within yourself and others, let's chat. Schedule a free consultation today and let's explore how holistic nutrition and emotionally focused therapy can support you on your path to wellness. Schedule that free consultation now and take the first steps towards a healthier, happier you. Find the link to my link tree in the episode description below. I love that you mentioned that just because we use these tools, just because we breathe, just because we sit in it and feel it, it doesn't mean that they're going to go away, but it's helping us heal healthily and going through them instead of ignoring them. And so I love that you mentioned that it can keep coming up, and this is a tool we will need to use over and over again.
It is, and it will affect a great deal of the healing when you continue to work with this practice. But by itself, it does have its limitations. At a certain point, you can feel yourself hitting a wall, as I did. And so we need to combine both practice and intervention. What I mean by intervention is like, okay, I would be doing the practice and I would be making headway. But when we carry these profoundly deep emotional wounds, these traumas, they're so deeply ingrained. It's like they're hardwired into us.
Right.
It alters the biochemical balance of our brain and the neural structure of our brain. And as I look into people's bodies and minds, I see and feel these configurations of how these traumas are held within the body. In what they call the chakras or layers of the aura, I can see and I can feel that. And what I notice is that there will be this damage or disfigurement, these distortions. And say I work with other individuals, being trained by a traditional Native American doctor and medicine man, I work as a conduit. So there's this extraordinarily powerful presence that works through me. And you'll go in and start to facilitate this change within the biochemistry of the brain so that there's this balancing of the neurotransmitters and there's this changing of the neural pathways and within the neural structure of the brain. And it's taking, again, what they refer to as the chakras and the layers of the aura. Sometimes when someone's experienced a great deal of trauma, emotional wounding, they fail to develop the chakras, the layers of the aura. They fail to develop. That reflects what's happening in the brain, the mind. It's showing these limitations in terms of an individual's ability to function, ability to show up and be fully present in their bodies, and to engage with life as fully. So as I'm working with these individuals, what happens is that there's this increase. Their capabilities, their range of motion is expanding. They can do more, they could accomplish what they need to get done in their life professionally, and the quality of their relationships improves. So we need the interventions. And depending on where we are, say in the United States or other countries or parts of the world, there are different interventions that are available. And there are those that are not available. Maybe if you're in Saudi Arabia, it's hard to find anyone to do deep tissue massage. But most places in the United States, you could find somebody who say you can go and have deep tissue body work done, because a lot of this emotion remains trapped in the body. And the fact that we're often disconnected from to varying degrees. So when we do the body work, it helps us to connect more with the body. It breaks this emotion loose. It comes into our conscious awareness. We can process those emotions. Other things, if you work with an acupuncturist, you're in this state of obsession, you're romantically fixated on somebody. And if you're doing acupuncture, it can help to balance the brain's biochemistry a bit so that maybe you're not quite so obsessed with that person. And it's hard to find individuals who have this level of skill, but some gifted homeopathic physicians, some of the homeopathic remedies. Years ago, back when I was in my 30s, there's a homeopath, I don't know if he's still practicing, is in the Boston area, Dan Cherry. So when I saw him and he gave me a specific remedy, and some of the grief or emotional wounding I was holding specifically in my chest cavity, and I could feel that breaking loose. A lot of that emotion was coming up very strong. So we need these emotions to come up to the surface. The most powerful interventions that I have found is the work that I've done, sessions I've received from some gifted healers. And because when we carry these traumas, I know when I work with people, for instance, it will take these lived experiences and all the highly charged emotions that are held in the body, and it will transform or transmute them so that we can thoroughly digest them. And as we're able to digest those life events, those traumas, all those highly charged emotions, we become lighter and freer.
So would you say that, because there's so many different modalities, and I fully agree, I don't think one modality is going to get you where you need to go on this healing journey, and I think that those shift and change as we continue on our healing journey. Would you say that people may need to try lots of different things to see what resonates with them, what works for them?
I do encourage people to try different modalities, definitely test them out. One of the things that I see a lot of people doing is they'll try something a time or two, but they're not thorough. Even in my own experience, before we had smartphones and social media, and these distractive technologies rewire our brains. And in doing so, it discourages the deeper introspective processes, while encouraging, like, it perpetually triggers this dopamine reward cycle. And so we're looking for the next reward, the next little hit of excitement. And so because of that, we tend to, it makes us a lot more superficial. We skitter along the surface of reality. So we need to be mindful of our use of distractive technologies, our smartphones and social media and all that. Limit the amount of time that we're using these technologies, because It's jacking with our brain chemistry and the neural structure of our brain. It's reshaping it in ways
Right.
that are not advantageous for us.
So would you say that that makes it so much more important to really tap into the somatics, really get connected to how we feel within our body, because we are so disconnected as a society? And as that continues to be more prevalent with technology, do you think that it's all that more important to go back to these modalities that really bring us into our body?
Definitely. And we need a commitment and consistency in our approach.
I love that commitment and consistency.
I generally do about 2 hours of sitting meditation practice. And for many people, it's a challenge. And the fact that we use
Yes.
these distractive technologies and it's rewiring our brains, it's so much harder for people to sit and be present. But if we commit to doing practice, and even if you start at 15 or 20 minutes and you gradually extend your time, the fact that when we consider the stress that we experience, the things that we go through, and the scope of one day, and if we just sit for 15 minutes alone or just maybe do so intermittently, the problem is we're just barely skimming the surface. And there's so much of that stress that just accumulates, where all these external stresses, we have our own internal cognitive emotional responses. And if we're not doing the deep internal work to process these things, it accumulates in our bodies. And when you
Mhm.
cut down a tree and you look at the stump and you see these concentric rings, and each ring represents a year of time. And so day by day, the stresses you go through at work and your relationship, other areas of your life, things that are stressing you out. And if you're not taking time and doing the practice and making use of the interventions, then those stresses are accumulating and they build up. And so people become more and more saturated. And with that saturation, we become more disconnected from our inner core being. And that stress, those emotions that we don't process, they never just go away. They just continually build up in our bodies. And so they're saturating the cells and the organs, and they're impeding their functioning. And as it keeps accumulating over the years, the decades, as we're getting older, on up into our 30s and 40s and 50s and on, and more of this accumulation of the residual of all the stress and the emotions we don't process. And not only do we accumulate it, but as it sits there, it breaks down and it putrefies within the body. So people feel thicker and heavier and denser. And so what I find in working with people, the fact that, again, training with a traditional Native American doctor, I act as a conduit, allowing this presence to work through me. So this presence will go in and take all that, the stress and this emotion, these lived experiences, and it will transmute this content. Now, it's crucial for people to do practice. The practices I teach, they're activating the innate healing intelligence residing within your body and mind. You need to do this practice. There are times I didn't do the practice. I could be on the vision quest and my body was still frozen and armored. And I find when people don't do practice, they get on the table and their bodies are still dense. So you do the practice, you become more fluid, and it's transforming, transmuting all this, again, lived experiences, the backlog of stress and the emotion, the cells and the organs, the tissues, everything's becoming more alive, body's more responsive. And it's a process, though. Again, a lot of people, because of the short attention span, tend to just try things out a time or two, and we barely scratch the surface. But as people return, they come back, we're getting into sessions 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 or more. Bodies become more fluid. There's this interactive quality. Sometimes I'm not even physically touching the body. My hands are above the body, but I could feel the internal organs moving as I move my hands above the body. Some people, as I'm working with them, they feel sensation of reconstruction taking place within the body. Again, that's when you work with someone, these indigenous healers or someone who's trained from one, those of us who work as a conduit in this sense have this capacity. Even myself, it's an ongoing process. It doesn't make sense to me. People who dabble in healing, do a session or two of this and that and jump around, do something intermittently all the days and weeks and months that they're not paying attention to their body, all the stress, all the screwed up relationships and toxic drama playing out in their relationships, other aspects of their lives. And I see people, even just being out, interacting with people in town, and I see and feel all the stress and craziness and drama building up in their bodies, and it's just not getting processed, and it just builds up. As I said, for 3 decades, I've been making my way back to the Wichita Mountains, going on the vision quest, that 4 days and nights, no food and water, going twice a year. So you can do the math and figure out how many times in 3 decades that would be. So as I keep going, it's like every time I go, it's like in the month or so before I go to the mountain, I'm starting to feel, even though I do a lot of practice on my own, I can feel things that I've gone through and how they're affecting me. But I go back to the mountain and it's taking that next step, and it goes ever deeper into the body. And so a lot of times there will be experiences going way back, different periods of my life, and I'm often surprised at how some of these stressful or really difficult or even traumatic events, some things I'd completely forgotten about. Here it's all coming back. I'm digesting those experiences. And most people fail to realize just how much we're carrying in our bodies and how it impacts us, how it impairs us, our ability to function. And we're just barely accessing a small percentage of our true potential. But what I find is the more I keep taking these steps, and I see this too, like training with this native doctor, this master from China, is that these individuals would, even as they're getting older, up into their 60s and 70s and on, and they're developing greater power. And so one can keep developing all through their lives.
Well, and I love that you mentioned that this is an ongoing process, and it's like that maintenance of anything else that we have. If we just kind of keep putting the band-aid on it, we'll get so far, but eventually we're going to break down. And
Right.
so that maintenance of taking care of our body mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and taking that time to really go separate, disconnect from technology, from everything else, reconnect with ourselves, use those different modalities, take that time to give back to us and be poured into. Otherwise, we're just continuing pouring out and things are piling up. And it's no wonder, like you said, everyone is really heavy emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally.
Mhm.
I don't see that it is the norm to take care of ourselves, to really reconnect, to sit with ourselves, to process what we're feeling. And so I think that that is such a great reminder. And I think that we hear it often, we're like vehicles. What you put into it and how you take care of it is how you're going to function. But really, just it is basics. And like you said,
Mhm.
it's consistency and
And
commitment.
commitment. Mhm.
Exactly. And these things, like you said, don't have to be really extreme things. A lot of people won't be able to go to the mountains, but what you can do,
Yeah.
like you said, is set your timer and sit with yourself and breathe, or watch a YouTube video from, a healer who helps guide you. Or we have an amazing person on here, Ben, who helps people do this. Ben, that kind of leads me into, can you please tell people what you do and how they can find you?
Sure. I can work with people remotely at a distance in terms of there's a whole series of meditation practices that I developed that will enable you to become more and more embodied, that will activate the innate healing intelligence residing within your body and mind. So I can teach these practices to anyone, anywhere in the world, as long as you have a connection whatever, WhatsApp or through Facebook Messenger or over the phone. Now, if at all possible, I encourage people to work with me in person, because in person, it could actually facilitate a much greater level of healing. I move around a bit. At the time of this recording, I'm in New York City, right in Midtown Manhattan, but there are times I'm in Northern Idaho. And just over a week, I'll be in the San Francisco Bay Area for almost a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And
right next to me, so maybe we can connect.
Sure, definitely. And I'll be in Kansas City, and sometimes I'm in other areas. I have people that arrange for me to fly to where they happen to be residing, and they'll line up a number of people for sessions. And yeah, so that's doable. And hopefully I'll be back in Europe and back in Sri Lanka and India too before too long, because I feel most at home in South Asia. And when I can work in person, that, most of you, the Vision Quest is too intense. You're not going to go and spend the 4 days and nights on the mountain without food and water. Too much. I've had some people build up to that, but those who can work with me individually, many people report, and I could see this, I could observe it myself happening, experience the same kinds of transformation occurring. And being in practice now for over 35 years, which I'm older than I look, I act as a conduit, allowing this presence to work through me. So I work with people with digestive disorders, colitis and Crohn's disease, are injured in automobile accidents, and have people with, say, digestive disorder where they're experiencing all this abdominal pain and passing blood in their stools, or chronic diarrhea, all these things. And in working with them, that the digestive tract begins to heal, they're no longer in pain or passing blood or the chronic diarrhea, and they could eat whatever they want within reason, of course. Or someone who is seriously injured in the automobile accident, it alleviates that physical pain, and they're standing straight again, and they're functioning, able to go back to work, even doing construction after a session. Depends on the person. Sometimes I work with people with various psychiatric issues, schizophrenia. They show considerable improvement, or with traumatic brain injuries, but also a lot of people struggling with anxiety, depression, the devastation of going through a breakup or divorce, or being repeatedly ghosted, abandonment wounds, so a wide range. But this presence works through me, just goes into the body to do reparative work and enable people to digest those lived experiences and all those highly charged emotions and all that stress and emotion. When you digest it, it becomes fuel for growth. Way that people can reach me, best go to my website, benoofana.com. Last name is spelled Oofana, so benoofana.com. If you're dealing with the devastation of a breakup, you can book a free call by going to refiningrelationships.com. That's relationships plural, so refiningrelationships.com. Download my free ebook, gettingoveryourbreakup.com.
Awesome. Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for your knowledge, for just your calm presence. I absolutely appreciate that. And just your desire to want to help others connect to themselves and to others as well. It's something that I definitely resonated with. And I was like, okay, we definitely have to chat. And there's some things that we didn't get to talk about that I really want to talk about. So I would
Sure.
love to have you on for another episode.
Sure, I would love that. Thank you, Amber.
Awesome.
Appreciate that.
All right, Ben, thank you.
Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed by myself and any guest on this podcast are solely ours and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of any organizations we are affiliated with. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. As always, consult with a trusted healthcare professional regarding any medical conditions or concerns.